My name is Antonia Woodford, and I'm a product manager on the newsfeed team at Facebook, where I focus on fighting false news. Before we get started, I wanted to pose a question to all of you. How many of you today have thought about a way that the products you build could potentially be manipulated by a bad actor? Just show of hands. OK, that's actually a good number of people. My hope is that after this session, we could get that number closer to 100% of people in the room right now. Many of you probably spend a lot of time thinking about how to create really great user experiences in your products. But what might not come top of mind initially is how to think about the ways that those products could be abused, and then what you need to do proactively to safeguard those products from those potential abuses. I work on a team at Facebook that's responsible for thinking adversarially about the ways that newsfeed could be abused, and then tackling those potential problems early to make sure that newsfeed remains an authentic experience where high-quality information rises to the top. Here's what we'll cover in the next 20 minutes. First, I'll set some context about how my team thinks about our responsibility. Second, I'll share a company-wide framework that we came up with to try to break down what might seem like intractable issues on the surface and make them things that we can get our heads around and start trying to address. And third, I'll walk you through how we apply that framework to the particular problem that my team deals the most deeply with, which is fighting false news. So let's start with our responsibility. Facebook was created, I'm trying to click through. Facebook was created as a place for friends and family to connect. And this is still the most important reason that people tell us they come to Facebook. But with more than 2 billion users, we also have a really big responsibility to make sure that we're keeping people safe on the platform and preventing them from having bad experiences. And in particular, we're focused on mitigating bad experiences in 4 areas. The first is safety. You should never experience harassment, hate speech, or inappropriate content on Facebook. The second is privacy. You have a right to control how your information is used and know how it's shared. The third is elections and democracy. We don't want Facebook to be a platform that's abused by either foreign or domestic actors to interfere in elections. And we're taking a proactive stance now to make sure that the platform isn't manipulated at times of heightened civic importance. And finally, your newsfeed. This is the team that I work on, and our focus on the integrity side is making sure that problematic content like spam, clickbait, or false news is minimized, and that high-quality, locally relevant, trustworthy information is what you see at the top. Our team is also ramping up efforts to fight false news around elections, and that's what we'll talk about a little bit more later today. But I want to also reinforce that even if integrity issues aren't your main responsibility at your company, ultimately, if people have bad experiences with your product, that translates into bad results for your business. And so regardless of whether you personally are on an integrity team, it's really important to be thinking about what can you do to prevent those bad experiences. So how do we do this at scale? There's not just one team at Facebook that's responsible for thinking about how to prevent bad experiences. It's actually something that every team across our family of apps, from Facebook to Instagram to WhatsApp, is responsible for thinking about. And we have to anticipate the kinds of abuses we're going to see, and then think about what can we do to prevent these at Facebook scale. And to do that, we need a common language, a common framework to organize ourselves internally in order to keep ourselves organized and know what we're each talking about. And we call this our problems, surfaces, and actions framework. I'm going to walk through what that means for Facebook, but I would encourage you to think about in the back of your mind, how does this apply to some of the problems that you might face at your own companies? And does this framework or one like it, could that help you also structure a similar approach? At the root of this framework are different problems that you might see. Problems are things we see on Facebook that we think shouldn't be there. A problem could be something about the actor, like a fake account sharing content. Or it could be something about a particular behavior, like spam or harassment. Or a problem could be something about the content itself, like clickbait, graphic violence, or false news. And if you're thinking about integrity issues at your company, this is a really good place to start, to say what are the kinds of problems that you think are most important that your users might encounter. But these problems don't exist in isolation. People have to encounter them somewhere. And because at Facebook we have a bunch of different apps, a bunch of different products, that each have slightly different dynamics and different nuances, we talk about these internally as the different surfaces where a problem might appear. And we try to break them down into different categories that we think behave in distinct ways. For example, we have monetization surfaces, like ads. We have recommendation surfaces, like pages you may like or Instagram Explorer. We have discovery surfaces, like search, distribution surfaces, like newsfeed, and finally, hosting surfaces, like pages or groups or profile, where you're originally sharing content to Facebook. And when the different problems appear on different surfaces, those are bad experiences for people that we want to try to prevent. And there's different actions we can take to tackle these problems. So the first one is remove. We could just remove something from showing up on Facebook altogether. But not all problems are equally severe, and sometimes we want to be able to treat a problem differently depending on whether it's on one surface or another. And so in that case, the action we could take is to reduce how often the piece of content appears, so it only appears at certain times that we think are appropriate. And finally, we want to give people more context about what they see, so they can make their own decisions about what to read, trust, and share. And so we also have a series of actions we take to inform users and make it easier for them to get more context. So let's talk about a particular example. Suppose there's a video shared on Facebook that's graphically violent. Facebook has a set of global community standards, which are principles for what is and what is not allowed on Facebook. And in this case, graphic violence actually goes against our community standards. So if we learn that this video has been shared on Facebook, we'll actually prevent it from being hosted, and it won't appear anywhere on any of our surfaces. Now let's take an alternative example. Suppose you have a video, and it's a video of a graphic surgery. Now this is still graphic, but you could imagine that in some cases, it could actually be useful to allow people to see this from an instructional perspective if you have people that are trying to learn more about these surgeries. So in this case, we want to take a slightly more nuanced approach. In the case of our ads policies, they actually prohibit advertising shocking content, so we won't allow this graphic video to appear in any ads. And likewise, we won't allow it to appear in our recommendation surfaces, because we want to be careful about what we're proactively recommending to people. But if you think about something like search, if I search Facebook for heart, I probably don't expect to see a graphic video of an open heart surgery, right? That would be pretty shocking and upsetting for me. But if I searched for open heart surgery, then it could actually be a really appropriate and relevant result. And so in search, we'll take the reduce action so that this video only appears for really specific queries where we think it aligns with the user's intent. Similarly, in newsfeed, we'll also reduce how often it shows up. Just because I have a friend who's a surgeon who comments on this video doesn't necessarily mean I want to see it, so we'll show it less often in newsfeed. And finally, if I do happen to see the video, because it's in a group that I visited or one of my friends shared it, Facebook will show me an informational screen that warns me that this is graphic, so that I choose whether or not I want to click through, and I'm a little bit more prepared about what I might see. And you can see that this is actually a much more nuanced approach we've taken to this piece of content than if we had to just decide to either allow it or not allow it. This framework also ends up being really useful internally as we think about organizing our different teams. So we have teams that are called problem teams, and these are the teams that are really responsible for deeply understanding a problem and thinking about how does it manifest, how can we tackle it, how does it appear differently in different places. For example, my team deals with the particular problem of misinformation and false news, and we're the subject matter experts in that problem. And we also have surface teams. Surface teams are the subject matter experts in the different products, the different surfaces, and they need to understand how do different problems manifest on their surface and which ones are most important for their product, like Facebook Live or Facebook Stories. And problem teams and surface teams work together to build out these different actions across the different products, across the different apps, and really work collaboratively together to mitigate bad experiences for people. And this is an especially useful kind of framework to have if you're working at a large company with a lot of different cross-functional teams and cross-functional stakeholders, because it makes it very clear who's responsible for owning the problem, who's responsible for understanding the particular surfaces, and ensuring that you have good coordination. So that's our company-wide framework of problems, actions, and surfaces. And I want to talk a little bit about now how could this framework be applied to false news, which, as I mentioned, is the area that my team works most closely on. We know that people want to see accurate information when they come to Facebook, and so do we. So we've been working hard to tackle the problem of false news. But it's also a problem that on the surface you might think is impossibly complex to handle. It's not something that any company has solved entirely, and it's actually a pretty new problem, not just for Facebook, but for tech companies in general. What we found is that even though it is a very challenging problem and continues to be, having a framework to break it down and think about the different components ended up giving us a way to actually start making some progress in operationalizing our policies. And I want to walk through what that looks like. So let's start with the remove action. A lot of people ask us, why don't we simply remove false news? As I mentioned, Facebook has a set of global policies, which we call our community standards, that outline what is and what is not allowed on the platform. They prohibit things like bullying and violence, and content that violates our community standards gets removed. But we don't have a policy that specifies that everything you share on Facebook must be true. With more than 1 billion pieces of content shared every day, you could imagine how hard that would be to enforce in practice. Did you really get engaged? Did you really travel to San Francisco today to come to the Amplify conference? It would just be impossible for us at scale to verify every single piece of content. But we do take our responsibility in this space seriously, and so we think that there are times when it's appropriate for us to use this action, which I'll walk through. One of the times when we take this action is removing fake accounts. It turns out that fake accounts are often involved in seeding and spreading misinformation, and they also violate our authenticity policies because we require you to bring your authentic self, your authentic identity to Facebook. Removing fake accounts is a really effective tactic to get at the root of a lot of the accounts that are spreading this content, and it's also something we can do really efficiently at scale. So to give you a sense of that, in the 6 months between last October and this March, we were able to remove almost 1.3 billion fake accounts, which was a pretty big, it's a pretty big number and a pretty big lever that we have in our arsenal. Another example of when we remove is removing advertising and monetization rights for pages and domains that are repeatedly spreading false news, because we think it's really important not to be profiting off of these bad actors. And finally, we also remove content or actors that are engaging in behavior that violate community standards that often co-occurs with false news. For example, calls to violence or hate speech. And even though as a rule we don't remove information just because it's false, we also recognize that there can be times when false rumors online stoke inflammatory sentiment to the extent that there can be real offline violence and harmful consequences. And so in those cases, we recently made a change to our policies that does allow us to remove the content. Let's talk about the second action, reduce. The most important action we take to fight problematic content in newsfeed is actually to lower the likelihood that you ever see it to begin with. While you can probably think of some examples of false information you think is really harmful, a lot of misinformation does lie in this gray area where it can be hard to tell what is someone expressing an opinion, even if that opinion is grounded in wrong facts, versus someone deliberately misconstruing the facts and trying to mislead people. It's really hard to determine that intent. And so what we believe is that downranking the misleading content ultimately strikes the right balance between, on one hand, encouraging people to express themselves and making them feel comfortable doing that on Facebook, and on the other hand, still protecting our community and making it a safe and authentic place for people to come. And to do that, we use newsfeed ranking. Newsfeed ranking is what determines the order in which you see posts in your newsfeed. On an average day, the typical person has about 3,000 posts that they could see, but typically they only scroll through a couple hundred of them. And so newsfeed ranking, which is what we use to order the posts that they see, is really powerful because we can make it more likely that the relevant, high-quality content shows up on top. And the way ranking works is it considers hundreds of thousands of signals about the posts that could appear in your feed, like what kind of post is it? Is it a link? Is it a photo? Is it a video? And who posted it? Was it a friend? Was it a page? And then it makes a couple dozen predictions about the content, like how likely are you to find it informative? How likely are you to interact with the content? And based on those predictions, it then orders the posts in your feed so that the ones that are likely to be most relevant to you are shown on top. And one way that we reduce false news is by using newsfeed ranking to disrupt the financial incentives for the people that are creating this junk news to try to make money off of it. In our research, we found that a lot of false news is actually financially motivated. Like email spam in the 1990s, spammers today can masquerade as legitimate news publishers. They can publish sensational stories, try to get people to click on them, and then direct them to sites filled with low-quality ads, which is how they monetize. And when we recognize that that's what they're doing, when we're able to identify that root cause, it gives us a really powerful way to actually go after that instead of just the output of it. So here's what we do in this particular case. We work hard to identify the tactics that these spammers are using. In this case, they use clickbaity headlines. They'll say things like, "You won't believe what happened next." And I, like most people, want to know what happened next, and so I'll click that link, and I'll end up on a landing page covered in ads, which is what we typically call an ad farm. So we'll identify those particular tactics they use, and then we'll train machine learning classifiers to predict them. And based on the classifier's predictions, if a piece of content looks like it's clickbait or looks like it's going to lead to an ad farm, we'll use that as a signal in newsfeed ranking to make it less likely that that content shows up on the top of your feed. And as a result, fewer people will see it, they'll be less likely to click on it, and ultimately the financially motivated spammers engaging in these tactics will make less money, and they'll be less incentivized to use this as a strategy to try to make money. So clickbait classifiers are a great example of how technology works, but fact-checking is also a big part of this, and so I wanted to walk through a way in which we use both technology and human expertise to get at this problem as well. The way that it works is that we build machine learning models to pick up likely hoaxes. This is content that we think might be false based on various signals like how users have engaged with it, how they reported the content on Facebook. And so we have some indication that it might be false, but we don't know for sure. We send that content to fact checkers to review and rate. And the fact checkers that we work with are independent, professional journalists certified by something called the International Fact-Checking Network, who are really the experts in sifting through the facts and determining what's true and what's false. When the fact checkers rate the content, they'll tell us if it's false or true or in some cases misleading, and we'll take action based on that to show content rated false lower in newsfeed. There's also a nice feedback loop here in that as fact checkers review and rate more stories, we're able to feed that into our machine learning classifiers and get even better at predicting false content faster and more accurately the next time. To give you an example of how this plays out in practice, in California recently, there have been a bunch of wildfires. And there was a hoax that went around saying that an illegal immigrant had started a small fire, which then turned into the enormous wildfire in Napa Valley. And it said he's been arrested for this and kind of used very inflammatory language to get people that were upset about illegal immigration to think that this guy had done it. Now, fact checkers looked into the story, and it turned out there was an immigrant who was arrested for setting a small fire. This had nothing to do with the larger California wildfire that happened about a week later. And so they debunked the claim. And we were then able to show all these stories perpetuating the hoax much lower down in newsfeed as a result of that rating. A third component of our strategy is inform. As I mentioned, people are inundated with information every day. And even though we have fact-checking and even though we have downranking of content we think, the content that we learn is false, we also want people to ultimately be able to make up their own minds about what to read, trust, and share. And so we've built a couple different products to make it easier for them to get more context. As one example, if you see content in your newsfeed that's been rated by a third-party fact checker, we'll show you a unit called Related Articles with the reporting that the fact checkers have done, so you can read a little bit more and decide ultimately whether you trust the claim or not. And if you try to share that content, we'll pop up a little warning screen that says, hey, there's additional reporting. Are you sure you want to post it, or do you want to read a little bit more first? If you shared the content, but the fact checker rating only came in later, then we'll send you a notification and tell you that that additional reporting has come up, and again, encourage you to visit the sites. And for just any domain on Facebook shared in the US, UK, and other countries coming soon, we released something called the context button, which you can click into, and it'll give you more information about a publisher. Like, what do we know about the history of that publisher? What do we know about where this particular link has been shared? When was it first shared on Facebook? And if it's something with absolutely no history on the internet, typically that's an indication that you should probably be pretty skeptical when you look at it. So how's it going? Typically, a hoax story shared on Facebook would grow in views over time and then gradually taper off. We found that when fact checkers rate content false, we're able to reduce future views by over 80% again, by using the power of newsfeed ranking, because we're showing this a lot lower in people's feeds. But we also know that it takes time for fact checkers to provide ratings. And with good reason. It's a lot harder to report through all the facts and come up with an accurate assessment of what's true and what's false than it is to just pump out junk news. And so we know it's important not just to go after the content piece by piece, but also to take action at the root cause. Like, who are the people that are sharing this information, and how do we make it less attractive for them to do so? So in addition to the work that I just mentioned, we also have penalties for the repeat offenders. These are the pages and domains that are repeatedly sharing false news that we want to disincentivize. When we identify repeat offenders, we'll reduce their overall distribution, not just for false stories, but for all the content they post. We'll ban them from advertising, and we'll ban them from monetizing on Facebook. Together, these actions make it a lot harder for them to continue growing and profiting from their audience on Facebook, and therefore discourages them from continuing to publish fake news. So where do we go from here? In the US, we're ramping up our fact-checking work around the midterm elections, and have a partnership with the Associated Press to fact-check and debunk hoaxes related to federal, state, and local elections in all 50 states. We're also continuing to take action at an automated large scale against fake accounts and cracking down on coordinated information campaigns. We're also continuing to expand our fact-checking efforts internationally. At the beginning of this year, we had fact-checking partnerships in 4 countries. And at this point, we're now in 20 countries and continuing to grow. We also launched fact-checking for photos and videos, because even though a lot of the false news that people see in the US tends to be in the form of articles that masquerade as news websites, we were increasingly also seeing false news spreading through other content types, and we wanted to make sure we had robust defenses. We're also trying to be increasingly transparent about our work, because we know it's important not just for us to be able to measure our success, but for the outside world to be able to validate what we're doing and come to their own conclusions. One important thing we did in this respect is we announced an academic commission that'll be looking into the effect of social media on elections. And the first project that they're undertaking is to come up with an assessment of the volume and effect of misinformation on Facebook and on other platforms. And finally, we know this is a really challenging problem. We know it's not something we can tackle just on our own. And so we're doubling down on external partnerships. I mentioned work with fact checkers. I mentioned work with academics. But we're also working with governments and other organizations to try to really leverage the best insights that we can get on this topic. Before I close, I wanted to leave you with a couple tips for how this kind of thinking and this kind of approach could potentially carry over to the different products that you all work on. My first piece of advice would be think adversarially. Try to anticipate how your product could be abused, and then act ahead. Without waiting for a problem to happen, think about what you could do to mitigate some of those potential risks. Second, a lot of these problems are really complex, and they can seem overwhelming at the beginning. I would encourage you to think about what frameworks can you use to break down those problems to make them a little bit more tractable. At Facebook, we use this problem surfaces and actions framework, but I would encourage you to think about what frameworks might make sense for your companies. Third, a lot of these problems are nuanced. Sometimes you can say that something is bad enough that it should just be taken down, but in other cases, you want to be more nuanced about what you can do and treat things differently in different places. And so I would encourage you not to just settle for the either or, but think about how to be thoughtful. And finally, a lot of us work at tech companies, and tech companies are really great at doing things at scale. But for some of these problems, human expertise is also important. So I would urge you to think about how are ways that human expertise of various kinds could complement your existing technological solutions. And with that, thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to take some questions. OK.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Antonia. That was amazing. So we have a couple questions from the audience here. Let me stand up here. The first question is, how often do professional fact checkers look at reported content? That seems like a very resource-intensive way to review content. So how often are fact checkers actually looking at the content?
So I would say fact checkers look at this stuff every day. One important thing to note is that fact checking isn't just something that exists on Facebook. There's a whole ecosystem around fact checking, which Facebook is now starting to plug into. And as I mentioned, there's content that we predict using machine learning algorithms to send to fact checkers to review. And we even have a product that we created for them where they can go review that content. But both on and off Facebook, every day, the fact-checking organizations have people in the office looking through stories, calling people up, reporting on the facts. It's similar to journalism for other groups. And I think you're right, it is resource intensive, and that's why it's not the only component of our strategy. That's why we're also trying to find ways in which technology can just go after violations at scale, like the fake account work that I mentioned. But yes, the fact-checking is still important as well.
Got it. So the next question is, are there follow-ups for people who may have seen fake news or interacted with fake news to let them know that they'd interacted with fake news?
Definitely, yeah. So the inform efforts that I mentioned are really important for that, because we want to make sure that if you interacted with a piece of fake news, if you shared it, if you even posted it, we want to make sure that we give you that information. And we see that a lot of people, when they learn that they've posted something false, will delete it or will then comment and try to raise awareness among their friends that it was false. We're constantly thinking about, is there more that we should do in this area? So I'd say we're often going out and talking to people and doing user research, but those are the measures that we've put in place so far.
Good. And so one last question would be, since there's maybe a lot of folks in the audience maybe launching a new product, would be if you want to build in sort of integrity-driven approach right from the inception of the product, and you didn't have necessarily the opportunity to do that, you're now trying to intervene. But if you had that opportunity, what would you do, or what would you tell a team who has that opportunity to kind of get it right from the start?
Yeah. So one strategy that I think actually is really effective is building in time to do some wargaming. So actually getting a bunch of people in a room, ideally before you launch a new product, so leaving yourself enough time to build in new things, new mitigations to potential problems, but get everyone in a room and then try to brainstorm. If you guys were adversarial, if you were bad actors, and you had this product get launched and you learned about it, what are ways that you would try to exploit the system? What loophole would you try to exploit? And you can do this a couple different ways. You can have everyone brainstorm in different groups, or you can sometimes set up two teams. You can have the team that's the bad guys, the team that's the good guys, where the good guys try to think about what problems will the bad guys find, and the bad guys try to think about how will they get around the existing defenses. But the point is, carve out time specifically to think adversarially, and then leave yourself some space as part of the product development process to additionally try to mitigate those risks.
Cool. So maybe one last question, because this is interesting to me. So how do you, if you're generally a good person or a good guy, how do you get in the mindset of a bad guy? So what is missing? So how do you do that on your team? Like, how do you take that adversarial approach?
It's a good question. So I like to think I'm a good person too, so I'm not sure that I'm always going to think of everything the bad guys will do. Part of the value of having diverse teams, right, is that different people will come up with different ideas for what could go wrong. And some people, a lot of times people are drawing from their experience at other companies.
Right.
So ideally you have people that have worked in different places and they've all seen different flavors of how products could be abused, and they bring that experience into the room. A helpful thing that I've found is that monetization is a really strong incentive, right? So bad guys often are trying to find a cheap way to make money. So an easy question to start with is, if you have a product that people can make money off of, how could it be abused? And how do you anticipate those gaps? Because that's certainly what will be exploited first.
Got it. So thank you so much. That was amazing. So will you be out and about if people have questions?
I will for a little bit, yeah.
Okay, for a little bit. So you can grab and join. So thank you so much. And
Thank you
all
so
so
much,
much.
everyone.
And get ready for the next talk.